In this series so far, we've talked about guilt. We've said, guilt, you're not the boss of me. We talked about envy. We said, envy, you're not the boss of me. And today, I want to talk about something that Jesus actually talked a lot about. I want us to talk about how to keep fear from becoming the boss of us. None of us want fear or worry or even anxiety to be the boss of us. And for many of you, fear has never been the boss of you. In fact, for some of you, the people closest to you are like, you could use a little fear, okay? You could use a little worry. You're just so optimistic, you just kind of blaze a trail but for most people, there is an element of fear or worry that plagues us, and from time to time, relationship to relationship, or in some specific environments, or in some particular area of our life, fear easily becomes the boss of us. Fear, as you know, it robs us of opportunities. Fear interferes in our relationships. It impacts how we parent. It impacts our marriage. It keeps us up at night. But the interesting thing about fear, before we jump into how to keep it from being the boss of us, and this is so important, fear is obviously not always a bad thing. You already knew that. But here's the cool thing about fear. Fear is actually a byproduct. Fear is actually a byproduct of something that is so important that none of us would want to give up what creates fear. Fear is the byproduct of our ability as human beings to accumulate knowledge and project that knowledge into the future. That's what allows us to fear. This ability, the ability that sort of underscores or allows us to fear, is also the ability that allows us to imagine, right? It's the ability that gives us the ability to hope. It gives us the ability to dream. Without it, you couldn't look forward to anything. You would never say, without this ability, you would never say, well, I can't wait. Because I can't wait is you're anticipating something good based on what you know right now. And I don't think any of us would be willing to give up that ability if that's what it took to get rid of all fear. Our ability to imagine has way more upside than downside. Because this thing that God has given us has allowed us to invent. It's allowed us to make the world a better place. It's allowed us to improve our lives. It's allowed us to improve our world. But it also creates the potential for fear because it creates an endless series of what ifs. Because what if is what about the future based on what I know about the present. Now, as you know as well, sometimes fear is a good thing, but you don't want, and I don't want fear to be the boss of me, right? I mean, there's a place for fear, but we don't want it to run or ruin our lives. It always puts us off balance. In fact, whenever we allow any of these emotions to take control of our lives, we are immediately off balance, which means we're always distracted, we're overly protective, and fear in particular causes us to become very, very self-absorbed. Now, what's so fascinating to me, and I hope to make this fascinating to you, is Jesus said so much about fear. But what Jesus said about fear seems so naive if you listen to what Jesus said about fear in isolation. And one of the problems with how the Bible has been presented to many of us, and this isn't anybody's fault, this is just the way of the world, is that we drop into isolated events from the life of Jesus, and we sort of look at them, we kind of bookend them like once upon a time, the end. But in fact, Jesus' entire ministry, especially with his 12 apostles, part of the journey was to teach them how not to be afraid, because the bottom line for Jesus' teaching when it came to fear, like Jesus, just give us the bottom line when it comes to fear, here it is. All right? Fear not. Stop it. Just quit being afraid. Thank you, Jesus. That's so helpful. I hadn't even thought about that. I'll just stop it. In other words, to use our terminology, he would say, don't let fear or stop allowing fear to be the boss of you, right? I mean, this is his message. Stop being afraid. Which, of course, is easy to say, but virtually impossible to do. Fear is a permanent part of the human experience. It just is. And there are lots of ways to cope. But none of us want fear to be the boss of us. And Peter, who panicked during Jesus' arrest, that very same Peter who lied when questioned, who hid years after the resurrection, he would dictate a letter to Christians, the first century Christians, those like us who have believed but have not seen Jesus. And here's what he says to you. And here's what he says to me. Based on his experience with Jesus. He said, let me tell you what to do. Let me tell you what you have been invited to do. Cast, throw, hurl, heave all of your cares on him. Why is that going to help us, Peter? Because let me tell you what I know that he wants you to know. because he cares for you. Cast all your cares on him. Why? Because I can speak with authority, Peter would say, because he cares for you. Literally, transfer all of your worry, transfer all of your fretting, transfer all of your anxiety, transfer all of your fears to him because he cares for you. And Peter should know because he faced things we can't even imagine. He eventually died in Nero's Rome. But he was confident that the promise Jesus made him, he was confident that the promise Jesus made the disciples and the apostles was a promise that he's made you as well. That he would say with the psalmist, though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, fear, you are not the boss of me. I already have a boss who conquered life, who conquered death. He is who he claimed to be. He is worthy of my fellowship, and he is worthy of my worship. And in this way, my friends, the life of Jesus, it's an invitation and it's a promise. It's an invitation to follow, and it's a promise that you can follow without fear. Fear not, even when there's something to be afraid of, because I am with you and I care for you.